Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to session 3 of the Secondary Behavior Community of Practice. Today's focus is going to be on data collection and how to use data to drive decision making. Since we only have an hour together, I want to quickly cover just a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Manning. This session is moved to a meeting instead of a webinar. So you will post your questions on the Jamboards. I'll put the Jamboards in the chat. There will be 2 of them. Jamboard 1 is if your last name begins with A through K. Jamboard 2, if your last name begins with L through Z. Questions will be answered at the end if time permits. All session materials and the recording will be sent out to every attendee once the recording is made available. If you are attending in a group setting, please email Dina Dina Smith. I'll put her email in the chat, an attendance sheet with first name, last name, and everybody who attended. That way your attendance will be counted. So the Jamboard, I believe, is in the chat. Is that correct? Are they there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much. And I will go ahead. Please make sure you're muted. And if need be, if you're having trouble with connectivity, turn off your camera. But it is my pleasure to turn it over to Christine Manning.
Hi, guys. Welcome and happy Thursday to everybody. I'll just say from the beginning that some of the content today is very different from what we did Tuesday. And then some will be a quick review because we had so many people from Tuesday that are joining today. So our learning objectives today are we're going to understand the importance of data collection. We're going to learn how to define behavior so that we take good data. We're going to understand continuous and discontinuous methods of data collection. Tuesday, we spent most of our time with continuous measurement. Today, we're going to spend a big chunk of our time with a discontinuous measurement. But you'll have both in your repertoire, especially if you have the video from Tuesday. We're going to learn how to collect data using interval measures and understand how to collect ABC data. The ABC data is at the very end. That is going to be very similar to what we talked about on Tuesday, so that people that were attending Tuesday and don't want to stay the last 10 minutes of this presentation can do that. But it will also be something that you will be applying in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, you're going to have case studies, but we're going to be taking data and looking at antecedent intervention. So today, at the very end of this session, it will really set you up for what you need to know for 2 weeks from now when we meet. I don't know if everybody's in the waiting room. I know let me just admit people here just so that no one's waiting. All right. Okay, so objective 1 is we're going to understand the importance of data collection. Data is really important because we don't know how to make decisions when we don't have data, right? And we are not reliable reporters. Sometimes I'll go in and I will meet a teacher after school and I'll say, "What you doing?" And they'll say, "I am writing down all of my data from today." And you can see that that could be problematic. At the end of the day, we're tired, we're hungry, we have other things on our mind, we need to get home. We don't know how many talkouts a child had. We need to take data in the moment as it is happening. And there are many different ways to do that. And I did list some of those in the Tuesday session. So if you go back and watch the recording of that, if you weren't there. We also want to take data because we need to know what the baseline data was compared to intervention data. So if we have baseline of the child is eloping the classroom 8 times during the morning hours, and then we put an intervention in, we want to see that that behavior decreases, right? So we want to see that that baseline is not 8. We want to see that it's 0 at some point because our interventions are working. If we don't have that data, we don't have anything to compare it to. So we want to know that our interventions are being successful. And that will help us determine if we need to make any changes or modifications to our interventions. We are going to be putting interventions in place with these case studies in 2 weeks. I hope that it will be really fun for you guys, but you'll be putting in interventions based on the function or the hypothesized function of the student's behavior. Because if we don't have function matched interventions, then the interventions may not be even appropriate. All right, so what is good data? Good data is taken in the moment. It's taken as we see it and hear it. It's objective, not subjective. We're not going to say this kid is tired today, so they hit their teacher, or so they were refusing to work. It's going to be objective, taken in the moment, what you see, what you hear, what you can observe. And that is measurable, right? So we're going to talk, I think, in a couple of slides when we hear people say, well, they're dealing with, I heard one today from a teacher, he's got ODD, he's oppositional defiant, right? And so I said, well, that's fine that he has that diagnosis. What are the behaviors that we're working with? What do we see him doing? What do we hear him doing? So that we can take the correct data on that so that we can help put interventions in place for this child. All right, we're going to learn how to define a behavior. And I know that this seems so simple, but I'm going to tell you guys a few stories that, kind of outline and give an example of how difficult it can be to have a behavior defined accurately and appropriately. We want to make sure that the behavior we're measuring, that we have a good operational definition, and that it's clear and concise. What exactly are we measuring and how can we observe that? We want to make sure that any person that's observing the behavior can say, this is what that behavior looks like, and this is not. So I gave an example Tuesday where I went in to collect IOA data with another behavior analyst in a school setting, and we were taking interval data on a student, and the behavior was that he would stay in his desk. So as we were collecting data, the teacher had asked the kids to have some conversation, and his partner was across the walkway, the row, where the rows, had a walkway in between. So he was kind of kneeling on his seat and leaning over to talk to his neighbor. Well, my fellow BCBA took that and took data on that was out of his desk, right? He wasn't sitting in his seat. And I kept the data that he was at his desk, he wasn't sitting, but he was on task. And that's the ultimate goal, is that the child is on task. So I think her data reflected he was 57% in his seat, and mine reflected like 98%. So we didn't have matching data because the operational definition was too loose. It was that he was going to be at his desk, and she was thinking that meant his pockets were touching his chair. And I was thinking that meant he was in his area, but he was on task, right? And so sometimes tightening up on that operational definition a little bit to make sure that we are measuring exactly what we're looking for. I was at a school, worked at a school a few years back, and they were talking about a student who would elope the classroom. And they said, he's out of class all day long. Well, what was happening was he would go to the threshold of the door, but he wouldn't go through the door. But they started counting that as eloping the classroom. My definition of eloping the classroom is he's outside of the classroom doors. He's down the hall somewhere, not standing in the frame of the doorway. He could still hear instruction. He was still in, being observed by the teacher in the classroom. And so it's really important that we have a good definition of the behavior that we're trying to measure, so that everybody who is with that child knows exactly what that means. And so with this child, we did put a definition in that when he went through the doorway and he was in the hallway, touching the floor in the hallway, that he had eloped the classroom. So that was a better way for us to get a good measure of really how many minutes he was missing of class each day. We don't ever want to use words like frustrated, depressed, they have anxiety, they have autism. Those are very real definitions. Those are very real disabilities that a person can have, but it doesn't constitute what their behavior is necessarily, or give an excuse for that behavior, right? So if somebody's hitting themselves and we say, well, this kid has autism, so they're hitting themselves, it's not an excuse. It's not something that we really even need to justify. We just want to say what behaviors we see that child engaging in so that we can measure those things. We can't measure anxiety. And a lot of times a teacher will say, oh, well, this kid does this because they are depressed. And then I'll go up and I'll ask, try to talk to the child, and they'll say, I just don't sleep well at night. Right. And so maybe they're not depressed, maybe they're tired. So we tend to put labels on things that we see to give kind of a justification for it. And all we need to do is, if he's got anxiety, that's fine. That's sad. Obviously, we don't want a child to be experiencing that in school, but I'm really interested in what behaviors is this child exhibiting, right? So maybe if the teacher puts a test down, they run out of the classroom. That's something that I can measure him eloping the classroom, or pacing in the back of the classroom, or biting his fingernails till they bleed, right? So they may be behaviors that are resulting from feeling anxious, but we don't want to call that being anxious. We want to call that eloping the classroom, biting his fingernails, and so on. And then when you use the word aggression, what does that mean? I gave the example Tuesday where I had a teacher that was measuring aggression to an object, where the child took the pen, it was a pencil, and was banging on the desk with the pen. And so every time the pencil would touch the desk, the teacher would tally how many times he was aggressive to an object. That's not aggression, guys. I'll tell you what, I have worked with aggressive kids, and that is called banging a pencil on a desk. That is what that behavior is called. Let's not call that aggression to an object. If I throw this pen across the room and it hits the wall, that's not property destruction. That's throwing a pen until it hits the wall. That's not aggression to an object, right? And so we need to really be careful how we are labeling the behaviors that we see, so that it doesn't make a child's behavior look worse than it is. I just did some work with a school last week, and we were looking over their suspension data. And those of you guys who know me know that I don't like suspension. I don't agree with it. I feel like there are so many alternatives to suspension. However, looking through this data, I noticed that there were a whole chunk of first grade students that had sexual harassment descriptions in their data. And I thought, how can a 7-year-old know? And how come there's such a high prevalence of this in first grade? How can they know what that even is, to label that as sexual harassment? And so we really had to whittle down from these incident forms what had actually happened. And most of the behaviors that we're engaged in could not be classified as sexually harassing to somebody. They're 7, they're hitting people, and they're learning, right? And so the label that we put on some of these behaviors, we really do our kids an injustice, and we scare future schools from when this kid comes in with his file, and he's got this file of aggressive to objects 125 times an hour. That's scary to people. So make sure that we're operationally defining the behavior, not only for data collection purposes, but also to really lay out what the child's behavior looks like and what they're doing, not giving it a label that's not appropriate. When you think about aggression, you might think about hitting. Well, hitting what? Hitting themselves, hitting others, hitting with a closed fist, hitting with an open fist, hitting with the back. I was in a school the other day, and a kid just kind of whacked me on the leg like that, just kind of playing around. And the paraeducator said, he just hit you. I said, no, he didn't. We're playing around, right? Well, he's not supposed to touch you. Don't count that as a hit. He didn't hit me when we were joking around. And so also the magnitude, right? If somebody hits you in the head, then that is probably more severe than if they backhand you on the thigh because you're joking around. And so despite the fact that the child was not supposed to touch me, we're joking around. It was appropriate. It was not a hit. And so making sure that we're taking into consideration where they're being hit, how hard they're being hit, if it leaves a mark, that we're documenting all of those things. Here's some examples of some things that we don't want to do. We don't want to use the word defiant. How many times have you guys said that? I'm guilty myself. Oh, he's just being defiant. He's just refusing to work. That's not really measuring a behavior, right? That's giving an excuse to that behavior. So what behaviors does that child engage in when he's being defiant? He might lay on the floor under the desk. He might say, no, I'm not doing this assignment, it's stupid. He might lay his head down on his desk and sleep, right? So there's a lot of different things that children can do that we can measure that may be classified in your mind under him or her being defiant, but we want to make sure that we're measuring, having the operational definition so that we can measure the specific behavior that they're engaging in. So instead of using depressed, say what they did that you can measure. They slept for 25 minutes during my lecture. They sleep the whole time during second period. What does that look like? Is it really depression? Is it something that we need to address differently? Anxiety could be pacing. I gave some other examples earlier. Angry. He's angry right now. Well, how do you know? What did you see? What did you hear? Well, he yelled, no, I don't want to, when I handed him the assignment. That is measurable. That's observable. You can also report if a student reports that they're angry or they're depressed or they're tired or they're not sleeping well. And in your documentation, instead of saying student is depressed, you would say student reports that they are depressed, right? And mark that down as their report, not your label that you're giving them due to their behavior. Overwhelmed, maybe the child was screaming, I don't know how to do this. Throwing a fit or having a tantrum. I see that a lot, especially in like younger grades or preschool. And that's kind of age appropriate actually, but we want to know, were they screaming? How long were they screaming? Were they laying on the floor, kicking, eloping the classroom, hitting the teacher, hitting peers? What does throwing a tantrum look like? And you guys think about little kids that you've probably known, and you think about adults that you've known. I think tantrum covers a really wide range of behaviors, right? And so having something that we can measure so that we can help make behavior better and put interventions in place is the goal of collecting data on these behaviors. There's a couple more here I'm not going to read to you, but you will get this PowerPoint in an email later. Okay, we are going to talk about continuous versus discontinuous methods of data collection. So continuous measurement is we are observing the child the whole time. We are constantly monitoring them and we observe everything that they do. So every instance of behavior we will see and we will measure in some way. Discontinuous is we're doing other things. We might be giving a lesson or giving instruction or passing out an assignment or helping other students, and then taking discontinuous measurements at the same time. So that's where you're going to have intervals of observational periods, and you will take data within those intervals. So you're not going to be watching the child solely by themselves. You'll be doing other things as well, many times. And sometimes people go in and take data on multiple children at once. So continuous measurement that we talked about on Tuesday were frequency, where we're tallying every instance of behavior, duration or how long a behavior occurs. And we also went over ABC data, which is what we're going to build on for next time we meet, is our antecedent behavior and consequence data. This type of data helps us put interventions in place that are a replacement behavior for the maladaptive behavior. So we want to teach students how to get their needs met and how to get what they want in socially appropriate ways. There are other kinds of continuous measurement that we did not go through in this presentation. If you want any information, then you can reach out to me and I will send you that information. All right, so the three types of discontinuous measurement that we're going to talk about today are partial interval recording, whole interval recording, and momentary time sampling. One thing I will say is when we are doing discontinuous measurement, that is not the preferred type of measurement to do. If you can do duration or frequency or ABC data, your data will be accurate. These types of data measures are not accurate. They're an estimate. And some of them are very, very different from one another. I meet with behavior analysts and behavior staff that work across Utah in different schools. And we did a video where we watched the same video for 2 minutes. And I had them divide their paper into 3 columns. We did partial interval recording in column 1, whole interval in column 2, and then momentary time sampling in column 3. we had very, very different data from observing the same video 3 times in a row. So it does give you an estimate, and sometimes it's not a good reflection of that student's actual behavior. So if you use one of these methods, I'm just going to give you a word of caution that you say, gosh, you know, I took partial interval recording, but this isn't really looking like what I saw in the classroom. This isn't really accurate. Then don't use that data. If you have to turn that into somebody, make a note on the top of it to say, this severely underreported student engaging in behavior. Or if you're in the moment and you're using it and you're thinking, this isn't working, know what other kinds of data you can collect and how to collect that so that you can get accurate data. So these are not as good to use these measures, but they're effective because it allows you to do more than one thing at a time. So partial interval recording is where behavior is recorded if it happens at all during the time segment. So I'm going to show you guys a data collection sheet. You might have a 2-minute observation period broken down into 10-second intervals. So the time segment is where the behavior either occurs or it doesn't occur. Then you're going to mark an X or a 0 or a 1 or a 0 or an X and leave it blank, right? However, you're going to take your data. But partial interval recording is if the behavior happens at all during that 10-second segment, you're going to put an X, meaning it occurred. If it doesn't occur at all, you're going to put a 0, right? So what if you have 10 seconds and you're recording kicking and the child kicked 10 times? You're not going to put 10 X's there. You're going to put 1 because it happened within that section, that's time segment, but we're not taking frequency data. We're taking partial interval recording data. And that goes to say as well, like if you are seeing that that is an issue, I would probably change to frequency data, or you could take it right on that same sheet and just say it was so severe that I felt like it was more important to take frequency rather than a discontinuous measure. Whole interval recording is in that little 10-second time segment if the behavior happens the whole time, right? So partial interval, if it happens at all, whole interval, if it happens the whole 10 seconds, then you put an X. If it goes for 9 seconds and then the behavior stops, you have to put a 0. And then it could start up and go another 9 seconds, and then it might stop and you have to put a 0. So you can see the problems with some of these different kinds of measurement tools. Momentary time sampling is that the behavior is recorded if you look up at the end of that time segment and the student is engaged in that behavior. So let's say the student is on task. You're going to have those 10 seconds. At the 10-second mark, you're going to look up, students on task, you put an X in that segment. Then you look down, do something else for 10 seconds. On that 10th second, you look up, students on task, you put an X in that segment. So we're going to go through a little bit more of examples on how to use these and when they would be a good measure to use or not. Discontinuous measurement is where only some instances of behavior may be detected and some may not, right? And so we're not going to catch every single thing a child is doing because we're doing other things. And in the case of like partial interval recording, they could be kicking 10 times within that one segment, and that doesn't really show an accurate measure if you have, yeah, he kicked during this time segment, right? It's not showing how severe it is. It's very underreported. So these are incomplete measurements. They provide us with an estimate. Behavior may be under or over or underreported. That is often the case. This is an indirect observation and it's less valid than continuous measurement. Like I mentioned earlier, when you're directly observing a student and you're taking frequency or duration or ABC data, you're not missing any behavior, you're recording all of it. So this is a method that sometimes we use if we don't have a lot of time, or sometimes we use if you're a teacher and you're teaching and providing instruction and you can't just be sitting there observing a student, which I know most of us don't have the time to do that. So making sure that we use those continuous measurements if we can. So we generally use discontinuous measurements when rate or duration would be too difficult to record. And I'm going to give you guys some examples of why that would be. All right, we're going to learn how to collect data using interval measures. I did put some videos in here, so when you guys get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on those video links and you can take your own data. I thought about doing that while we were together, but I just don't feel like there's enough time. The next 2 weeks, we will have case studies where we will do a lot more interaction with the data collection and some of those things. So we'll have more of that practice then. But if you want to use the videos in here to practice collecting data using these different types of data collection tools, you can certainly do that. All right, so partial interval recording, you have an observation period. It might be 20 minutes, it might be 5, it might be 30, whatever that observation period is. And then you're going to break that observation up into intervals, time intervals. Typically, those time intervals are from 5 to 15 seconds, but they can be longer. I choose a longer time interval if the behavior of interest is less frequent, right? So if I'm watching a student and I'm measuring talk outs, but he doesn't talk out very often, I might put my segments in, 30-second intervals or 1-minute intervals even. So it really depends on the behavior you're observing and how often that student engages in that behavior. So I have taken 5-second interval data, and it was almost impossible because you're looking at your stopwatch, you're looking at your tally sheet, and you're looking at the child, and then that 5 seconds is over. And then you're halfway through the second set of 5-second intervals. So the shorter the interval, the more difficult it is to take data. You really have to be on top of it if you're going to take something that has that short of a segment. So shorter intervals require more work, but they have more accurate data. One tally is recorded in the time interval if the behavior occurred at all during that interval. Even if it occurs many times, you're going to tally that as one time it happened to that interval. You put an X. If it didn't happen at all during that 10-second or 15-second interval, you put a 0. So we're not counting frequency, and partial interval recording does overestimate behavior, sometimes by a lot, right? Because if sometimes the kiddo might engage in that behavior every 15 seconds, and so it looks like they're doing, they are doing that behavior a lot, but sometimes it overestimates. It's not that big of a deal, but it looks worse than it is. This is the most common type of discontinuous measurement. And I think partially because you see the behavior in that time frame or you don't, so it's easy to just take quick data on. And like I said earlier, if you're taking data and you're using one of these discontinuous measurement tools, make sure that you say, this was not a very good representation of this child's behavior just due to the tool that we're using, right? So you're going to first of all determine the length of your observation. You might have 20 minutes, you might have 2. You're going to break the intervals that are equal in length. So if you're going to be doing a 2-minute observation and you have 10-second intervals, you want all of those time segments to be 10 seconds. So a 20-minute observation may be separated into 2-minute intervals with 10 boxes, right? So that seems pretty easy. So that would probably be on a pretty low rate behavior. To do a 2-minute interval. I rarely do a 2-minute interval on behaviors that I'm working with. A 15-minute observation may be separated into 10-second intervals that have 90 small boxes. And I know that sounds like a lot. I'll show you some data collection sheets and I will send you some as well. But really, you're just putting a small little X in that box. And so it's not too overwhelming. And maybe it's just because I've seen it so much, maybe. All right, so you're going to put an X or a tally or a 1, whatever is going to signal to you that behavior happened in that time segment, or a 0 for no occurrence of behavior. Some people leave it blank. I kind of feel like if we're putting something in every time segment, it makes sense to me to have an X and a 0, just so that we know that they were paying attention during that time segment and we're clearly marking that no behavior occurred. So even if the student engages in swearing 3 times during that 10-second interval, they're only going to get 1 X in that interval, meaning that behavior occurred at some point during that 10 or 15-second interval. At the conclusion of the observation, when you're done, you're going to count the number of intervals in which the behavior was observed. So, for example, you have a 15-minute partial interval. So you have 90 boxes and you have 10-second intervals. At the conclusion of the observation, you have the total number of intervals, which is 90, with an X showing that behavior occurred. So let's say that you have 24 intervals that have an X in them. You have 24 X's. So that means that the total intervals, the total number of intervals where behavior occurred was 24. You're going to use that as your numerator that goes on top, right? And then 90 is the total number of boxes. So you're going to use that as your denominator. Then you're going to divide and you get 27%. Do not get fooled and put 27% of the observation, because it's not 27% of the observation. It's 20%, 27% of the intervals that show the student was talking out. So make sure that if you do use a partial, any of these discontinuous measurements, that you clarify in your writing that it's an interval, not the observation period. It's not the time. Okay, so we use partial interval recording for behaviors we want to decrease. So you might use this with talking out or being out of your seat, or sometimes maybe swearing if there's a higher instance of swearing. We don't want to, we might also want to do it for low rate behaviors, right? So we might do a longer interval period, and maybe the kid swears 10 times a day, and you might take interval data within every 20 minutes or every 30 minutes, because it's only periodically that the student does that. And so you're going to want to know, like, when during the day is this behavior happening? And so maybe you mark your day out into 30-minute chunks. So you have 30-minute intervals from the whole school day. So you might have, what, 12 or 13 boxes. And you notice that, gosh, this kid's only swearing between 8:30 and 10:30. That's when we do language arts. That's data for you. That's showing you something's going on there, and we can step in and put interventions in place that may help that student, right? If it's consistent all throughout the day, then it's a little bit different. But when you're collecting data like this, you're going to start to see patterns, and then you can step in and problem solve when you see what's going on, and maybe put some interventions or give some more support in those areas where they're having more behavior. You can also use partial interval recording when the behavior is not easily counted, right? So I was in a classroom in Wyoming, in Riverton, and this kid was laying on the desk and he was kind of moaning and groaning and not really complaining. It wasn't really disruptive, but it was a little bit more irritating, I think. And so, but he would moan really loud, and then he'd get kind of quiet, and then you could barely hear him, but he didn't really stop, but the magnitude was really up and down. And so that would be a good behavior to use partial interval recording for, because you would know, is he doing this in every interval? And the answer would have been yes, he was, until the teacher was wonderful and was able to redirect him and give him positive praise and get him back on track. So sometimes when behavior is difficult to say, well, is that frequency? Is that duration? The magnitude is so different that neither one of those is really appropriate. So maybe partial interval recording would be an option here. Here's a recording form. The good thing about these recording forms is, regardless of whether you're using partial interval, whole interval, or momentary time sampling, you can use the same form. And so I just put interval recording form on mine that I use for my company. I take partial off because the staff can decide, or I will direct them what kind of data to take depending on the context. But you can use it for any kind of interval. So here's an example. You'll have the student's name, the teacher, the subject or period. I also like to have the activity in there, because a lot of times our kids are better during some activities and then have more behavior during other activities, such as transition or independent work or project work. So it will give us data just having what activity the student is participating in. The date, and then the behavior definition, making sure it's specific, it's observable, you can see it, you can hear it, and it's measurable. How am I going to measure this and take accurate data on this behavior. Then your total observation time, and then the length of the interval. So as you guys can see here on the row, it doesn't have the length of each interval. So this could be 10-second intervals, this could be 2-minute intervals, right? And so having the length of the interval at the top will let you know how long that observation lasted. Here are your videos that you guys can watch on your own time and practice if you'd like to. So that was partial interval recording. Partial interval, it happens at some point during that time segment, right? Whole interval is where the behavior occurs the whole entire time segment, not just once, but the whole time. So if it's 10 seconds, it's got to last from second 1 through second 10, right? And then you would put your X in there. This tends to underestimate behavior, right? So we're saying this happened that whole segment, but man, there's been times I've used this data collection tool and I have a kid literally that is screaming or engaging in whatever behavior I'm monitoring for 9 seconds. And then that 10th second, they stop. And I think, do they know what I'm doing here? Do they have a timer and they're looking at it too? Because it's almost surreal, right? And so, and then it would start up in that next segment and it would last 8 to 9 to 10 seconds. But I had to put a 0 in that section because it did not last the whole 10 seconds. So you guys can see that this could grossly underestimate instances of behavior. So you've got to make sure that you use it with the right types of behaviors. So you might use this when behavior is not easily counted. You could go back and talk about the child I was just referring to a couple minutes ago, where he was making noises and it was kind of higher magnitude and then lower. That would have been fine to take whole interval recording just on noise, right? So I couldn't really do screaming because there was moaning and then there was kind of humming and it would kind of vacillate between the magnitude of the level of his voice. But if the behavior was, making noise or disruption in the classroom, you could definitely use whole interval recording for that. This would also be a behavior that doesn't really have a beginning and an end. It just kind of goes and kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. He did take a breath, but that's not really the ending of that behavior. It just continued on, but he had to breathe, right? You can also use it for high rate behaviors. So if you've got things that are happening at a high frequency and you feel like a 10-second or 15-second interval might be more appropriate than taking tallies of all the times it happens, then you could use whole interval recording for that. We want to use these for behaviors that we want to increase. We want to understand that it may very much underestimate the behavior. So some of the examples you could do would be playing with peers during recess. We want that behavior to increase, right? And I'll just put a plug in right here. If you have kids that don't have friends, help them make friends. I don't care if they have an IEP or not. If they're new to you or they don't have friends and they want friends, I see less and less friendly interactions happening when I'm out at schools. And when I talk to teachers, they just say there's so much disconnection. So increase that playing behavior and that positive peer interaction during transitions and recess and other activities. You are going to want to increase engaging in independent work, cooperating on an assignment, playing with a toy during free time. All of those things that are positive behaviors that we want to increase are things we could use with whole interval recording. The advantages is it provides an estimate of the duration of a behavior, right? So if you don't have time to sit there with your stopwatch and take duration data, you may be able to get about a duration by looking at the whole interval recording. Because if you've got intervals that have X's in them, you know that behavior happened for about 30 seconds. If you've got 3 10-second intervals that have an X in them, then that behavior happened at least 30 seconds. So you would be able to get an estimate of what that duration is close to. Disadvantages, it does require undivided attention, right? You can take other data and do other things, but you're really watching to see, does that child engage in that behavior the whole time segment or time interval? And then, as I mentioned with the partial interval recording, it's really difficult, especially if you have short time segments that you're looking at your data sheet, you're looking at your stopwatch, you're looking up at the kid, and it gets really fast and kind of crazy. I don't think I've ever really had good inter-observer agreement data, which is IOA data for behavior analysts, between observers when we had less than 10-second intervals. 10 seconds is even just hard enough. Here's an example of a chart. Like I said, partial interval, whole interval, and momentary time sampling could all be taken with either one of these charts that I've showed you. I will also send more to Dina. She'll send some more out. If you have data collection sheets that your school is using, please don't get me in trouble by bringing mine in here. Get permission to use a different data collection sheet if you would like to. But here, they're taking data on calling out. So if the child calls out within that 10-second interval, you're going to put a plus. If they don't call out during that interval, you're going to put a minus, right? And then you're going to total up. And this has totals at the end of each row. That might make it easier for some. So whatever makes sense to you guys. But whole interval would be that child is calling out that whole 10 seconds. Teacher, 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 look at me, I'm raising my hand, right? So that whole 10 seconds is calling out. That probably isn't going to be something that you're going to use whole interval recording for. Maybe more appropriate for partial interval or momentary time sampling. There's a video that you guys can watch if you're interested. The last one we're going to talk about before we move into continuous measurements is momentary time sampling. So we have partial interval. It happens at all during that interval. You mark it as observing the behavior. Whole interval, if the behavior happens the whole time interval, you put an X in there. This is momentary time sampling. This is where you're recording a behavior. If you look up at that very specific time and you see the behavior, it's an X or a plus, right? If you look up at that very specific time and the behavior is not happening, you mark a minus. And that can be tricky because sometimes you look up and the kid is starting to engage in the behavior, right? But they haven't yet. It's a minus. So it can be tricky. Momentary time sampling can overestimate or underestimate instances of behavior. So advantages are it's not continuous, so you can be doing other things. So if you have a 15-second interval and your little beeper on your phone goes off, you look up, you see that the student is engaging in their homework, put a plus, go back and do something else for the next 15 seconds. You can do other things. It's easy to implement in class. A lot of teachers that I work with want to try this kind of data collection first because they feel like it's easier for them to collect data on something like this. And a lot of times they won't use a data collection sheet. They'll just put a tally or something on their whiteboard so that they can just look up and say, okay, there were however many intervals of time, and then take that data from there. So you can be flexible in how you're collecting your data. Just make sure that it's accurate or as close to accurate as possible. This is also great because you can take data on multiple students at once. So the timer might go off and you look up and you see that, oh, yep, those 3 kids are working, plus, 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 and go on and you're in that next interval. And this may underestimate or overestimate actually a student's behavior. So there are no correct or incorrect number of intervals or observational duration periods. I'm sure some of you guys have been called in to take data, or you thought you were going to be taking data, and as soon as you sit down and you do 30 seconds, then there's an emergency and you have to get up and go do something else. So that still is some data, right? So I wouldn't just scrap that. But you can do collect data for as long of an observational period as you would like. And you can take the little time intervals and you can make them as long or as short as you want so that you're getting accurate data. And then the same interval data collection sheet can be used for whole interval, partial interval, and momentary time sampling. I would just make sure that you write on the top of that which measurement you're taking, which one you're using for that measurement. All right, this is the important part of what we're doing today because we want to build on this next week. We're going to understand how to collect ABC data or antecedent behavior consequence data. And this is awesome because this type of data helps us understand why a student might be engaging in a particular behavior. And then it helps us understand interventions that we can put in place to prevent that behavior from happening and teach the skills that the child needs to be successful in the school setting, and also what consequences are happening after the behavior that may be making that behavior worse or better, right? So understanding this chain of data collection is going to be amazing. Just to give you a quick rundown, antecedents are events that occur prior to the problem behavior, and they may set the occasion for the problem behavior, right? So if you put a math test down and Johnny crawls underneath his desk, the antecedent would be the presentation of the math test, and maybe even say, Johnny, we're going to take a math test now. It could be both of those things, right? And then the behavior was Johnny got under his desk. The consequence happens right after the behavior. So maybe the teacher says, Johnny, get out from under your desk and go to the principal's office. You can talk to him for a minute. So Johnny gets out of the classroom. Johnny gets out of taking the test. Maybe Johnny goes down and has a really great interaction with the principal, and then the principal brings him back, but it's time for the assembly. And so Johnny gets out of taking the test at all. And he had a really great time while he was out of the classroom, right? So he didn't have to take the test and he had all these other things happen. If Johnny's behavior of crawling under the desk when he's presented with a math test, if that behavior increases, then the consequence was reinforcing to him, right? And so it really allows us to pick apart those pieces that we can obviously prevent behavior from happening in the first place, almost at all costs. And if it does happen, then looking at those consequences to determine why this child continues to engage in this behavior. Something after that behavior is happening is making it worth it to them if they still continue to do that behavior. And oftentimes we inadvertently provide consequences that we think might be something that we want to use as a punishment. I hate to use that word, but and sometimes it might not be. There was a kid that I worked with a couple of years ago, and he would get in trouble right before recess. Well, he would miss recess, but he didn't want to go to recess. And so his bad behavior was reinforced because the consequence was desired, right? He didn't want to go to recess. He would have a bad behavior. The teacher thought they were punishing him by keeping him in, but he was actually reinforced by being kept in. And so that behavior kept getting worse and worse and continued to happen. All right, so an antecedent is something that precedes the behavior. So it's an event that may set the occasion for the behavior. So anything that happens right before a behavior, we write down. And I always hear teachers say, it just happened. There was nothing that happened beforehand. And that sometimes is true. Sometimes we can't observe what's happening in our students' mind, or we don't know what happened to them on their way to our classroom. And so sometimes it may be an event that occurs that you don't know about, right? And so that's where we can talk to the student and ask them what happened, right? So making sure that we know what those events are so that we can put antecedent interventions in place, which we're going to practice next week, so that we can prevent behavior from occurring. Common antecedents at school. I want you guys to use the chat right here. When you have a student that's engaging in poor behavior or challenging behavior, what are some of the antecedents? What are some of the reasons that you guys are seeing that a child might engage in a problem behavior? Hopefully people will type in. Yes, does not want to stop doing an activity. Right. They're doing something fun, maybe even just talking or hanging out. Hungry, tired, lack of meds. Good, Jessica. Wonderful. Getting ready to take a test that they're not ready for, dislikes the activity. A lot of times are, things that we're asking our kids to do are really difficult for them. And they, none of us want to do something that is too hard, We want to do something that's just hard enough, right? So those are some good ones. I worked with a kid a couple of weeks ago in a high school where he caught his girlfriend kissing another guy in the hallway on his way to class, right? And he came in and punched the holes in the wall and was really upset, but nobody knew why. He just came in and started punching the wall. So when the teacher was filling out the incident form, she was like, there was no reason. Well, there was a reason, but we had to go back and talk to him to find out what had happened, right? So that was an antecedent. Obviously, how do we prevent that? Well, we had to work with all three of those kids to help kind of get that behavior to stop so that there wasn't problems in the school. Behavior we've talked about is something that the person does in their environment, something we can see, something we can hear, something we can measure. And then the consequence is the result or the effect of that behavior, right? So anything that follows the behavior, and it follows the behavior and it was caused by that behavior. So I really want you guys to understand one thing here with consequences. Consequences can maintain that behavior, so there's no change. It just continues to happen as often as it does. They can increase behavior or they can decrease behavior. So we have to be thoughtful and logical when we're putting consequences in place for kids. And those of you guys who know me know that I'm very much, let's reinforce good behavior, give them good consequences. I worked with a kiddo this morning where they call her uncle if she's bad. And I said, can we call her uncle if she's good? Right? Let's look at what we want her to be doing and give her some metric that she can be successful, not 100% accuracy, but maybe 70% accuracy right now to start and get her good behavior going. And I got a text a little while ago that said, we called her uncle, she had a great day. So we can just turn around some of those negative things and turn them into a positive because we want to focus on building skills and building positive repertoires with our kids. Here is an ABC log data collection sheet. I did send this to Dina, so she will share this out. You do not have to use it. At the top, you see the target behaviors, the student's name, the period, the teacher. I would also add the activity. Oh, the activity is in the column, never mind. Date, time, activity, antecedents, you may have several, right? You may have a chain of things that happen that then cause that behavior or you think may set the occasion for that behavior to occur. Consequences could be a lot, right? Like the example I gave with the child that crawls under the desk. They got attention from the teacher because she told him to leave, got attention from the other students because they're all looking, got attention from the principal, got out of taking the test, and still got to go to the assembly. Like that doesn't even make sense, right? So really looking at ABC logs and those data collection sheets, we can see like where we could do better for one thing, but it also helps us to target why the student is engaging in certain behaviors and what consequences might be continuing that behavior. The other data collection sheet is a checkbox where you can go through and check what kind of things were antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And you'll get this data collection sheet as well. So ABCs in practice, we want to make sure that we put antecedent interventions in place to prevent behavior, right? So if the student that climbed under his desk because he doesn't like the word test, then we don't have to use that word. In elementary schools, we do a lot of timed things. A lot of our kids don't like timed things. And so we just say, you don't have to use the timer, right? But all the other kids are doing a 2-minute timing. And when that 2-minute timer goes off, it's not for you, it's for all the other kids. But then I'm going to collect all the papers, including yours, but you're not timed. I mean, it saves a lot of problems, right? Or you can say, you know what, you don't have to be timed at all. You can keep your sheet and then just turn it in at the end of class. I mean, making some of those adjustments so that we can prevent behavior from happening. At least he's doing the work rather than getting out of the work. Consequence interventions, we're going to reduce the challenging behavior and improve desired behavior because of very thoughtful, logical consequences that we put in place that serve the function of that behavior as well. So just remember, consequences can increase, decrease, or maintain behavior. And this is science. Science works. It doesn't not work when we do it right. And there's a lot of trial and error in this. I'm not going to say I'm perfect. There's times that I go in and I put something in place and it does backfire. And that's why I've learned and you're learning a lot of different tools that you can employ to help manage student behavior in your classrooms. But antecedents, behavior, and consequences is functional relation. If you change something here, something's going to change down here. If you change some of the consequences, the behavior will change. And so we really want to be thoughtful and mindful and scientific and have good data to support what interventions we're going to put in place. And I would ask you guys, as you're getting ready for next time we meet, to maybe come with a student that is challenging, maybe collect some data on the student so that you know where you're starting and work toward, even though we're going to have some case studies that we're going to be working through, you can also be working through the student that you have in the back of your mind to say, what antecedents can I manipulate so that this behavior does not happen again? Because it is a functional relation and it will change behavior. All right, here's one practice just so that we can see, and you guys are going to use your chat. Mark is a high school student who is chronically late to art class. The teacher, Mr. Watercolor, speaks to him on a regular basis and asks him to please be on time so he doesn't continue to be docked 5 points every day he's tardy. Mark tells Mr. Watercolor he tries so hard to get to class on time, but he's clear on the opposite side of the campus and all of the other students in the hallway. It's really difficult for him to get to class on time. All right, so we're going to start with the behavior. What behavior did Mark engage in? And I know this might be a little tricky, but what do you see Mark doing? What's the behavior here? Maybe you guys have already gone home tonight. Yep, he's late to class. Right. Good, good. Being late to class every day. Good. Chronically tardy. You guys are so great. Thank you for hanging in here. I know it's Thursday and it's almost 5. Being late. Good. Behavior is being late. What is the antecedent? What sets the occasion for Mark to be late? Students in the hallway. Good. And Colleen, I want to come back to not accepting responsibility. Yeah, that's good. Maybe he hates art. Good. Okay. Well, he's saying that he's clear on the other side of the school, right? So the antecedents are to his late behavior. The antecedents are he can't get there. He's saying I physically can't get there, right? What is the consequence, or what are the consequences? There's a couple in here. What happens after he is late? Yeah, good, Paula. He's far away from class. Good. Yeah, he's docked points. Good, Jessica. 5 points per day. Good. Good, Pollyann. Good. Yep. And he's also talked to by the teacher, right? Staff attention. Good, Adam. I love it. Yeah, so there's some consequences here, right? So if Mark really cannot get to class, what is an antecedent intervention saying that he loves art? He's really trying to get there on time. Can you guys think of any antecedent interventions that you can put in place before he's late to help him be on time? Yeah, he can leave his previous class early, a few minutes, even 1 minute early, right? I love it. You guys love this. Good. I know we have a lot of teachers who are just going to continue to mark him tardy and take points away. Some of our kids really need some extra help. And even if he was talking in the hallway, but you gave him an extra minute, that would go probably a long way toward your relationship, right? And then helping him take accountability for being on time. Yeah, good. Or the art teacher, good. So the other teacher can let him out a minute early, or the art teacher can say, I'm not going to count you tardy until 30 seconds after the tardy bell rings. I love this. I love this. And this is the kind of stuff that we need to think about for our kids, regardless of what the problem is, to help them be successful at school. So here's the antecedents, the transition, crowded hallway, the class is far, behavior, he's late to class. The teacher speaks to Mark about being on time, and he also gets 5 points docked every time he's tardy. Good job, you guys. We did a lot today. I know our time is up. We talked about how important data collection is. and how to define a behavior so that we can get good data from that behavior that we're looking at. We talked about a little bit of continuous, the duration, the ABC is a continuous measurement, and the frequency. We did not go over those in depth, but they are in the video from Tuesday. And then discontinuous methods, we talked about whole interval, partial interval, and momentary time sampling. And we taught how to use those interval measures to collect data. And then we understood, hopefully, how to collect ABC data. We're going to build on that next time I see you guys. And it's going to be super awesome because you guys are going to be thinking about out of the box to help the kids that you work with to be successful. Even though it will be case study, it'll be probably something similar to what you're dealing with anyway. So what I want you guys to do is set a goal. Just take one or two little things that maybe you could implement without too much problem so that you can get some data on some of your kids to bring back with you when we meet in 2 weeks. And trying to implement things to help our kids be successful and avoid them having negative behaviors. There's my email. If you ever need to email me, you can. Dina will have send out an email with all of the data collection sheets and other things that you guys may need, handouts from this presentation. And I hope you guys have a great Thursday. And thank you for being here and participating. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine. And I just wanted to thank everybody who stuck it out and stayed till 5 o'clock. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Gloria. Thank you.